Nietzsche, the genius who killed God, then called himself God. Turin, January, 1889. A man runs into the street, wraps both arms around a horse's neck and sobs like the world is ending. For him it is. Strangers pull him back. He doesn't fight them, he can't, something inside him has already gone somewhere they can't follow. This man built his entire life around one demand: master yourself completely or life will do it for you. So what happened to the man who wrote the rules, and broke every one of them, on a street in front of strangers? His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. He's the one who wrote that God is dead, the one who said human beings don't have to accept the values they were handed, they can build their own from nothing, out of pure will. Become who you are, with no excuses left standing. That was the whole architecture. And somewhere inside it, a door was left unlocked. 4 years old, he loses his father, a pastor, from a family stacked with clergy going back generations. Grief before he can even spell his own name. At 24, he's already a professor at the University of Basel, without a doctorate. His mentor believes in him so completely he breaks the university's own rules just to get him the chair, youngest professor Basel has ever hired, and technically, he's still a student himself. Then Richard Wagner walks into his life. Nietzsche doesn't just admire him, he worships him, defends him, treats him like the father he lost at 4. For years, Wagner is everything, then it collapses completely, into one of the ugliest feuds in the history of ideas. The man he once called a genius becomes, in his own writing, everything he despises. Around the same years, something small happens, a fall from a horse, it cracks his ribs and barely earns a sentence in his letters. Hold on to it anyway. Because right after his body starts failing on its own terms, migraines that blind him for days, a stomach that never settles. At 34 he resigns his post, renounces his citizenship and becomes a man who belongs to no country on the map. And here's the part that refuses to make sense: sick, homeless, alone. This is exactly where he writes the books the world still hasn't finished arguing about. At 37 he meets Lou Salome, 21, Russian, and in his words the sharpest mind he's ever faced. For once he believes someone might see past the reputation and reach the man underneath. He proposes. She refuses and leaves for Berlin with his closest friend. He doesn't just lose her, he loses the one theory he'd never tested, that his mind, given enough force, could make anyone stay. Rejected, sick, alone with a body that won't cooperate and a heart that just proved it can't win every argument. This is Nietzsche at the bottom. It's also without warning where his biggest idea is waiting for him. Here's what actually explains him though. He doesn't think at a desk, he thinks with his legs, 8 hours a day through the mountains, because he genuinely believes no great idea has ever been born sitting down. Near a lake in Switzerland he lands on the heaviest thought of his life: what if you had to live this exact life again, every joy, every wound, forever on repeat? What if you had to live this exact life again, every joy, every pain, every mistake, every bitter moment, forever? Would you still say yes? It isn't a riddle for his readers, it's a verdict he's demanding on himself at the precise moment his own life gives him every reason to say no. The next year, he writes 5 books in 12 months. Not the output of a man planning ahead, the output of a man who can feel something behind him and won't look back to check what it is. Then he sits down and writes a book with chapters literally titled, Why I Am So Wise, and Why I Am So Clever. Everyone around him laughed it off as an ego trip, nobody clocked it as the first tremor. Weeks later, it catches him. Turin, January 1889. A cab driver is whipping a horse that won't move. And the man who spent his life demanding total self-mastery finally meets the one thing he cannot master. He wraps his arms around the animal, he doesn't let go. Nietzsche spent decades warning that pity was weakness, that mercy softened the strong into the ordinary. His mind is about to go dark for good, and the last full thing it does, before the silence, is exactly the thing he spent his life arguing against. The letters start days later, to friends, to strangers, to kings, signed with names that aren't his. A friend reads one, leaves his coffee unfinished and takes the next train to drag him out of the city. What caused it? Doctors are still fighting about more than a century on. Maybe syphilis. A rare nerve disease, possibly a tumor quietly growing behind every word he ever wrote. Nobody knows for certain. His mother takes in the man, his sister takes the work, and rewrites it quietly, stitching in the politics he spent his healthy life despising. The philosopher who declared war on lies spends the next century buried under one written by his own blood. He never hears it. Maybe the horse was never about losing control. Maybe it was the one-time discipline finally lost, to something more human than his philosophy ever had room for. So ask yourself the question he couldn't outrun, not whether you'd relive your life exactly as it happened, but which parts of yourself you're still trying to master and which ones are only waiting for permission to finally let go.